Hi, everyone. I have someone on the show today who I genuinely could not wait to introduce you to. My guest is Caroline Baird, an HR executive, leadership strategist, and holistic coach with more than 30 years of experience inside some of the largest organizations in North America. She has held senior HR leadership roles inside multi-billion-dollar organizations where she sat at the table for complex operations, high-stakes decisions, and the kind of culture challenges that don't come with a playbook. Today, she runs her own practice, working with executives and leadership teams on the intersection of strategy, culture, and what she calls somatic leadership, the idea that sustainable leadership isn't just a mindset shift. It happens in the body first. She also hosts her own podcast, Today's Evolving Leader, which, full disclosure, is where she had me as a guest not too long ago. So today, the table is turned. Caroline is on the impact list because of how she shows up in the world as someone building a business. In entrepreneurial spaces, scarcity is everywhere. People protect what they know, they guard their relationships, they treat every conversation like a competition. She's never done that. She knowledge shares freely, she roots for people genuinely, not performatively, and she operates from the belief that there is enough good work to go around. And then she actually acts on that belief. That kind of generosity is rare, and it has mattered to me personally as I've built my own practice today. On our show, we talk about what's actually happening to leaders right now, the kind of tired that's different from burnout, and why we've trained people to carry more without teaching them how to lead without losing themselves. Let's get into it. Caroline, I have to say, there's something a little bit surreal about this. The last time we were recording together, you were the one asking the questions, and I was sitting across from you on your show, and I thought, wow, she's so good at this. I definitely have to have her on my show when it gets launched. So I want you to know I did study our interaction from last time to be able to bring some of that in, and now it's my turn.
Great. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and support your podcast.
And, we always like to start with one of those questions to ease us in. And I know it's real early in the week, but what's something that's kind of given you pause or made you laugh in the last few weeks?
Oh, I like that. Or made you laugh. I'm big about learning about seasons. So if you think about what season you're in, that's been something I've been focusing on lately, and I've been talking to individuals about. So what is the season that you're in? Because we're always developing and growing. Otherwise, what's the point? And I love that we get to shift our mindset, maybe pivot a little bit, because what I found was, and we've talked a little bit about it in the past, is individuals get promoted because they've done a wonderful job. They've worked really hard. They get promoted, but what got them there is not what's going to make them successful. And so you can look at that as a season. And some of the things that I talk to individuals about, and I know we'll go into more depth, is even listening inward to what is it you want to achieve. You get to put a rubber stamp on this role that you've now potentially been promoted to, or that has been given to you, or a new team, or whatever that looks like. And so what does that look like? How are you going to show up as your best self, but also make a difference in not only your life, but in your team's life? And so I've been really pausing around that and talking to individuals that I support to ensure that what they're doing is something that is sustainable, that is actually building momentum, building growth, and not just being stuck in the rut of doing the same old every day.
Yeah, it feels like that funny part of the year to align your, seasons of work, but also seasons in general where, it's not quite spring yet. It's not quite winter. I feel like people are starting to rethink about, what is the rebirth that's coming, and what do I want to be and do and look like going into the next quarter, going into the summertime. So it makes sense that you're also pausing on the growth part of career as well. And when I think about you overall and just how our paths have crossed, the reason that you're really on this list for me today, it's not just about that work you do. I love that you're intentionally thinking and pausing, but the work, while it is exceptional, it's actually how you show up in the world. And it echoes what you just said. You're building a business, you think a lot about how the leaders are showing up, how they're showing up for their teams. And for me, it's about how you show up in the entrepreneurial spaces. And, that scarcity mindset really is everywhere. People protect what they know. They guard their relationships. They always treat everything like a competition. And you've never done that. You've knowledge shared freely with me. You've made introductions. I've done the same. And you really root for people. And I think that's an important quality in these entrepreneurial spaces. You operate like there's genuinely enough work to go around, and you act on that belief. You don't just say it. And that kind of generosity in these entrepreneurial spaces is rare. And it's definitely impacted me as I've started on this journey as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Laurie, is if I think back to a simple training that we did, and you probably know this when you're doing a training on what's the difference between a manager and a leader. And you also explore leaders that you liked and leaders that you didn't enjoy working with, and what were the differences between the two of them. I've always been a firm believer in there is enough work for everybody to go around, but also sending the elevator down to anybody who's ready or wants to be developed, because they have to have the will, obviously. But I think really taking the time to get to know people, build relationships with them, like you said, raise them up, help them to get where they were, because that was the leader that I wanted to emanate based on leaders that I had. And so I look at it a lot of times as what's the legacy that I want to leave behind as a leader? So, do I want to be the leader who micromanages? Do I want to be the leader who challenges individuals to grow, to develop, let them have a say, start to build their confidence, their trust? What does that look like? And I think when you do that as a leader, what you do is, you so inspire and empower your team that you're not only developing individuals that are going to be happy and you're going to have a great culture, but the performance is just going to skyrocket too, because they're going to try things. They're not going to be afraid to take a misstep, because you're going to treat it as a learning experience, right? So I think just making sure that you realize on a daily basis.
And, I think just given how challenging it can be in the workforce in general, now also feels a little bit tougher, right? So we see a lot of leaders that are really stretched thin and, for a variety of, I'm sure, very good reasons. None of them are asking for help, but they're clearly tired, right? And, I think it's really interesting to think about, this is the leader I want to become. These are the skills that I want to emulate. These are the behaviors I want to emulate. But we never talk about what the trade-off is. In order to do those things, you may find that it's a learning for you to be able to do those things. It takes time to do those things. And leaders today are really tired. So, when you think about, the leaders that are really busy or stretched and they are trying to do their best, but they are exhausted, tell me a bit about what that sort of means and like what that looks like for you.
Yeah.
In your practice.
Oh, wow. We could do a whole separate podcast on this. It's a hot topic. Mm-hmm. So I would say for a lot of leaders, especially in North America, we've been really raised to do. There's no opportunity to be. And when I say be, there's no opportunity for strategic thinking sometimes. There's no opportunity for development of self, because you may be developing your team, but don't have time to do it for yourself. And so I think, going back to what is so important, it's really going inward and listening to your body, because a lot of times that I was there, Laurie, I burnt out. I was overwhelmed, didn't raise my hand because it would show I wasn't successful, and therefore burnt out. And it was the worst, because then talk about leaving your team flying on their own. Now you've just added more workload to them. And what I learned quickly was, as the leader, it is your responsibility to stay focused on the goal. Like, what's our goal? What's our objective for this year? And I had a leader who used to say to me, does it meet? Is this thing that you want to do or this meeting that you're going to attend going to help you to achieve your goal or objective? And if it isn't, it's just something bright and shiny that's going to distract you. So what is it that is going to help you meet your objectives? And so I think a lot of times what happens with leaders is you said it, they're afraid to raise their hand and ask for help, but they're not going inward to seeing what it truly is that they need for themselves in order to be successful. Not sleeping well, checking your emails first thing in the morning and at midnight before you go to sleep, right? Those are the things that are going to overwhelm you as a leader. And so that's why I bring a lot of the somatic work into the work that I do, is let's at first understand what is it that's important to you? What is it that you truly need? And then how do we build that life from there? And yes, there are always going to be things that leaders don't want to do that they have to do. But as a leader, it's also your responsibility to manage that workload, to say yes or no to those above you, or maybe to say yes, but that means we have to pause or stop on this. You're the gatekeeper of your business, your desk, your unit, whatever it is that you oversee. And so that's where, I think we're talking about it later, about white space, where it's so important to create white space on your calendar for you to be able to do those things.
I actually want to dig into something that you just said. We'll
Sure.
definitely get to the white space, but it's actually something I don't think we talk enough about in the leadership spaces, because what you're describing is like, it's not a mindset problem, right? People are highly motivated to be successful leaders. And I've experienced it myself. There's something that happens to the body. And, having that language for it is so important, because it happens to your body before you can even really name that something is wrong. And that's what, I want to explore a little bit more with you today, is that, when you see a leader that is starting to lose themselves, what are some of those first signals? Like, what is happening to their body, right? I mean, we've all been in the sessions where they're like, if you feel stressed, take 9 deep breaths. Like, that's not entirely what we mean when we tell them to pay attention there. So love to hear more about what that feels like for leaders. What have you observed?
Yeah, so really at the end of the day, and I don't want to use too many somatic terms for your listeners, but our nervous system is the gatekeeper of everything that happens in our body. And when our nervous system has a couple of states, you can either feel safe, feel trusted, feel like you belong, and have that confidence and courage, or you can be in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn state, right? So when something happens, it triggers. A lot of times what happens then is not a result of the current situation. It's something that we've learned or an experience that has happened to us in the past, but it's triggering whatever we're being asked to do or are doing at this time, and it's causing that overwhelm or that stress. When we're constantly doing that, so it could be something as simple as your boss coming in while you're prepping for something, saying that, you just have to drop what you're doing. You have to come handle a situation. That will put you in a bit of turmoil, because it's now you're thinking so many different things, as on top of the fact that you now can't finish what you need to complete. So what's happening is your body is going into overdrive. And when we go into overdrive or overwhelm or burnout, whatever you want to call it, your body is signaling to you that it needs to pause, it needs to rest, it needs to figure something out. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we're going inward and listening to the body, and we do that through somatic healing. And what I'm saying is, it doesn't mean that you don't do the work that's assigned to you. What it means is that you're taking the time to do what it is that you need for you to show up as your best self, for you to show up as that calm, confident individual who knows what they're doing and doesn't get frazzled by the external factors that come in, because we can only control internal factors. We can't control the external. And so a lot of the somatic work I do, depending on what the situation is helping individuals to catch their breath again, is a great way to say it. But it's deeper than that. It's really understanding what is it that I need today in order for me to go back to feeling safe, feeling confident, feeling like I can trust myself, and then taking control of the situation that's at my hand and doing everything with intention. So intentionality is something I speak a lot about. Intention with how you treat yourself and your body, and that you're eating well and that you're getting regular sleep, but also intention on how you show up at work and what are all the things that we're doing, And we can do almost like a stop, start, continue program where we look at everything we're doing and we can start to understand, oh, these are the things that are triggering you. Here's the reason why. So we explore not only the external factors, but really you're going into the internal of why it's triggering you. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of healing that we can do to unwrap what that trigger is. And all of a sudden you don't feel that way towards that work anymore.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you're sort of describing that full arc of like recognizing you're burnt out to getting to the other side of it. And I think it's really interesting because we've normalized a lot of those signals, right? We've trained ourselves to treat that proof of burnout, of stress, of grinding our teeth, of our shoulders up by our ears, of, making fists with our hands under the desks. We're conditioned to think that that is proof that we are working hard enough. And, exhaustion becomes that badge that we have earned. And at some point, something does have to give, right?
Right.
And, we talked about sort of that belief we've had to unlearn. For you, I know we've spoken about this in the past that, sometimes it is being, exactly as you said, more intentional, more specific, really noticing, what the behaviors are, what that slowing down looks like, and then what replaces it. So, to the point you just made, I want to know a little bit more of like, okay, so, walk me through when a leader comes to you, they recognize they're really stressed out. They know they want to replace those behaviors. What changes? What do you help them shift through your practice?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, we're shifting the beliefs is basically what we're shifting. We're shifting the belief that this needs to occur or I need to handle these situations. And it's trust me, it's not just in your professional life, it's in your personal life as well. But what we do is we start to dig into, well, where do you want to go? Let's set the intention first. Let's talk about what's happening in your world. What is the intention that you want to do? And then we go backwards and we go inside. So we go in to understand what is the thing that's upsetting you or causing the stress. And sometimes it's just workload. Okay, well then let's revisit your workload. Let's revisit the fact that you're a leader and you've got calls from 8:00 in the morning till 6:00 at night with no space even for lunch. Of course, you're going to be overwhelmed and burnout, right? But again, intentionality comes into that where we get to explore which meetings are important, which topics are you working on, which projects are you working on that are really necessary to drive, again, what's the objective, what's the goal? And so when we go inward, we get to approach leaders with what is the belief? Well, the belief is that I had to work really hard to get this job. So in order for me to be successful, now I'm a leader, so I must have to work even harder. Well, it's not working harder. It's being smarter about it. It's learning to be. It's learning to take those pauses in between so that when one of your colleagues or one of your team comes in and wants to speak to you and has a problem, that you're fully present. You're not somewhere else thinking about something else or answering an email or checking your phone while, this individual is needing your support. And I think that's part of the difference between a manager and leader, right? A manager is more do, where the leader is truly leading. The leader really needs to set the example, and you can't set the example if you're not doing it yourself. And again, there are going to be seasons. There are going to be seasons where you need to do that, where you're going to have to probably feel a little overwhelmed and a little overextended. But those should be far and few between. Those should not be the norm. And so for any leader hearing this, I think, the first thing is, are you okay to raise your hand and say that something's broken or something needs to change because I can't sustain what I'm doing right now? And then digging into, okay, well, what's going on and what is your goal? Because we can help you go there. We can break down those beliefs, those stories that you tell yourself that I have to work these hours. There doesn't need to be. And so let's help explore what that story or belief is to help you get over that hurdle so that you can lead from a beautiful space where you're calm, collected, you've got courage, conviction, you're intentional, and your team can feel it and is supported by it as well.
As you're talking, there's this really interesting example that comes to me from, previous work lives. So when I was pregnant with my first child, I was working in a large consulting firm, and within our practice, there was something like 6 or 7 of us pregnant at the same time, all within we're all due within a couple of months of each other. And we would repeatedly have these stories of we'd have the baby shower, it'd be your last day at work. And somewhere between 1 to 4 days after checking out of work, you would give birth. It didn't matter if you were, it was you were 2 weeks early, if you were 2 weeks late, whatever that time frame was. It's like we'd overworked our bodies so much. We'd finally now given our body permission to just be calm. It was like, okay, you're ready to move on to the next thing. And I think about it because at that time, exactly as you described, I was like leaving the office at 6 o'clock after, 8-9 months pregnant. And then I was coming home, getting dinner on the table. Then I was continuing to work until midnight to then go to bed, to then wake up at 7 o'clock, to then do the whole thing all over again. And you don't think about it. You're doing it because, well, that's how everybody works. Everybody's working this way. And obviously it was, before pandemic, which I think shifted the workforce a little bit. But as you're talking, that's what really sticks with me is that, well, you got to keep busy and you got to keep moving it forward. And that intentionality you mentioned earlier with your calendar and that white space in your calendar, I do think, earlier in career, you're like, no, there's no time for white space. You just keep running and running and running and running. And the results of that are never great. You never look back on those times and you're like, I did my best work. You usually look back and say, I did a lot of work. It moved a lot of things forward or it, just happened repeatedly. But I feel like in my career, I've never looked back and said, that was the best stuff I've ever done. It was so purposeful. One of the things I also think in further how that ties to listening to your body and really paying attention, being intentional is sometimes it's hard to give yourself permission to stop, but being able to sit down with somebody else and hearing how they get intentional, where they stop, where their pauses are, but also having them say to you, it's okay to take a pause. It's actually not self-indulgent. It's really intentional and building those environments for yourself where you're not just supporting getting the work done, but also you as a whole person. What do you need to feel successful? And, we talk about kind of the white space for leaders, and we do talk about it as a luxury, as self-indulgent. And, when in those conversations and in the ecosystem of leaders that you've built and over the conversations you've had, what does that look like? What does it look like to help somebody see that maybe they need an intentional break? And what is the trade-off? How do you sort of get them there so they really believe that taking the pause is the right thing?
So, and I'll share about a recent leader that I supported doing exactly that. Had been working around intentionality. And so that next phase was building white space, because how do you drive the business? How do you strategize? How do you look at how do you look at your ROI? Where are the reports that I can look at to support the business structure that we're building, and what's working and what's not working? So I had a conversation with her around white space because we took a look at her calendar, and I said, really the way I learned was you don't have your email open on your computer. You actually have your calendar open on your computer. And she was like, oh my gosh, but what if an email comes in? Okay, well, tell me how urgent an email is versus a phone call. An email to me says, and that's part of the belief again, right? An email is, I will get to it when I get to it. I'll get to it today. But really what you want to do is you want to use your calendar as the guide, because you've set your calendar, or should have set up your calendar with intention for everything that you need to do. And it can be seasonal, right? Because there are certain things that are going to happen through the seasons. But when we looked at her calendar, it was jam-packed. It was the typical, what I said, from 8 to 6, there were meetings. There was no time for lunch. So walk me through that. Well, I have lunch at my desk. I bring it in. Well, when do you check in with your team? When do you go talk to your colleagues? Well, there was no opportunity for that. And I'll preface it with you saying that she also struggled because when we started to dig in around, well, where could we find white space? What could that look like? What could we let go of that would support you? She immediately was like, well, no, I have to attend that meeting. So again, there's those beliefs where, yes, you could absolutely attend every meeting. Yes, every meeting will give you information, but is it going to help you do what you need to do? And so what we started to explore, and I had to push her a lot, was, okay, what are the things that you could potentially give to one of your team members as a development, right? So maybe there's a meeting that they can attend. It can be part of their development. So they're going to learn more about the business, and they're going to come to you and they're going to recap you either through a, face-to-face or by email, whatever that looks like, depending on how urgent it is. Or what if it looked like, okay, well, Laurie's got this meeting that's going to be an hour and a half long. It's once a week, but you know what? Only 30 minutes of it is really relevant to me. Well, then I'm just going to attend the relevant piece and let her know that I won't be there for the rest of it. So I think it's really about starting to hold space and protect it like you would with so many other things. You would protect space if it's a doctor's appointment. You would protect space if it's, right, all these different things. Well, how do I protect space that allows me to be strategic, that allows me to catch my breath? Because you can do it. It's just a matter of being intentional about it. And so what we were able to do was build this beautiful calendar for her where she had 3 significant white spaces every week on her calendar, which then allowed her to work on strategy, work on a project, maybe run reports to see how things were going, collaborate with colleagues, not only for her own development, but to see what's happening in the business, and even work with her team and have a team meeting, which they had, but it was very download. It wasn't collaborative. So we really changed a lot of things, and the impact, allowed her to really take control of her business, which she felt like she was being directed on, you need to do this, this, this. But she was able to push back and say, you know what, I don't think that's going to work, and here's why. Or here's what we're going to be doing. Be very succinct on what it is that you're going to be doing as a business for a project to try and drive business, and let individuals ask you questions or poke holes in it for you. But start to take control again of your space on your calendar and the business that you have. And as a leader, you're going to make phenomenal change and legacy in what you leave behind.
It's really interesting because as you talk about it, I'm like, yes, this is a thing that all the leaders should be doing. Absolutely. But we know that some of the cultures of the organizations that people are in, they don't support that. They say they do, but they really don't. So I'm curious what a version of this looks like inside a culture that actually doesn't support people taking the time they need, people being intentional. What does it look like when you're working in a place that wants you to answer those emails on the weekend, wants you to answer everything in the evening, needs you to be available 24 hours a day? How do you continue to create this space for you?
Part of it is we can get quickly caught up in that type of a lifestyle. I was there. I worked in the retail space. They're open 7 days a week. I never knew when I was going to get a call. But what I had to do was set up boundaries for myself. Boundaries that were, this is when I'm working. This is what I'm willing to do. If it's a 911, those are separate, right? 911s, you're going to deal with those separately. But if you don't set those boundaries, and trust me, once you're in a business and you've been doing that type of lifestyle, trying to create those boundaries can be difficult. But I think creating the boundaries and communicating them is so key. I think the other piece is, having the conversation with, okay, well, I'll check my emails on the weekend, but I'm literally blocking a half hour here, and that's when I do them. Aside from that, they're going to wait for the next day. Again, if it's urgent, they're going to call you or text you anyways. But I always felt that people put too much stock on emails, and yes, people are looking for information. But at the same time, the flip to that is, Laurie, I remember I did a stop, start, continue with my team. I remember there was a report that we used to do, and I asked, why do we do this report? Well, we've just always done it. So I said, well, what's the purpose of it? Like, are people using it? Is it the information they need. We haven't changed it in years. Oh, well, we don't know. And I said, okay, well, I'd love for you to reach out and find out what they're using this report for. They reached out to 5 individuals, and nobody of those 5 individuals was using that report. And it took this woman 3 hours every Monday to create it. So I finally said, okay, you know what? For the next 3 weeks, we're not going to do this report. And we're going to see if anybody else says, hey, we really need this report. Nobody did. It was crickets. So I think sometimes we have the habit of just taking on more and more and more. And in a situation like that, where the expectation is high, you also have the opportunity to look at things and say, this isn't needed anymore. Well, I've just saved myself 3 hours. I can probably get through my emails and in those 3 hours. So it's, the other piece is if they're absolutely adamant that you're working 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, I really have to question if that's the right place for you.
Yeah, no, it's a great reminder, right? That nobody is stuck.
Right.
You've got a lot of agency, you've got a lot of opportunity to really be thoughtful about where you are, how you're showing up, what you're bringing into the work environment, what you're taking away from that work environment. And when you think about your work now with leaders and building on, our conversation and the practices that you've built and put in place, what's the thing you most want the leaders to walk away believing about themselves?
I think it is around the agency. It's around the agency in anything you do. You just have to take a step back to understand what that is. Because, even if you think of an entrepreneur, I could do all the things that are going to keep me busy, but that may not be the thing that inspires me, lights me up, is the direction I want to go, the legacy I want to leave. And I think it's, if you always have choice. You may not like the choices, but you always have choice, and really going inward and saying, okay, here's this crossroads I've come to. These are the 3 choices, and kind of exploring each one to see which one resonates most with you, I think is so important. So I would say always remembering that you have choice in no matter what you do. And you know what? The other thing I would say, Laurie, that just came to mind is there was a reason they promoted you. So if they promoted you, they appreciate the work they do, they appreciate what you bring to the table. Why not change things up? Why not be a little bit more courageous? Like, tell fear just to move aside a little bit and take that step and try something different. Again, like I said previously, if you're replacing somebody, you don't have to do it exactly the way they do it. You get to bring you and your unique self to the role. You were hired for that role. So be a little bit more courageous, have a little bit more fun, and try some things.
And I think that's a great way to think about it. And I don't think we always do realize that, a lot of that inner strength and that inner resilience and mindset, we tend to look a lot externally for some of those pieces, but so much of it comes from within. And, with that spirit in mind, for our listeners, like, you run a business, you host a podcast, you work with organizations and leaders, and you do all of that from what feels like an abundance mindset. Mm. And, we are the composite of the experiences that we've had. In the spirit of the impact list, I'm curious about who has impacted you. Is there a person, is there a group of people that have helped you become the leader that you are today?
Yeah. And look, those 2 individuals, there's more. There's so I'm going to narrow it down to 3 particular individuals. One was, I mentioned already, he was the president. I was able to learn the business at a different lens that I'd never seen before when I became a director. So it was really cool to understand all the different nuances, and 2, I knew what their pain points were. The second one that I mentioned was my boss in the States. He was a VP. He taught me about white space enhanced, because I used to have white space, but he really helped me with, well, what do you do with that white space? What does that look like when you do have white space? And he was also very supportive in making, if I made mistakes, he'd always ask the question, well, what would you do differently? You made the judgment with the best information you had at the time. But what would you do differently, hindsight? Because hindsight you would always change how you reacted or what you did, right? And then I would say the third one was the woman who actually hired me into my role. She had been a VP for many, many, many years. And she was an individual who I was like, okay, as a director, I would love to emanate a lot of her style and mannerism because people felt very comfortable around her. And she taught me a lot around speaking my voice and offering my opinion, even if I didn't, not having that fear to hold you back. Even if I thought, they may not like it, go ahead and say it, because trust me, there's probably somebody else in the room who's thinking it, or potentially nobody else in the room is thinking it. And wow, that's really going to help them make the best decision for the business. So I would say those three leaders were probably the ones that had the biggest impact on me.
I love hearing about that. It's always nice to reflect back and think, how did I become who I am today and create this kind of this mindset and this business that you're in. And, for me, I could stay in this conversation for another hour. But before I do let you go, I want to make sure people know how to find you and what you're working on right now. I know that you've been kind of quietly building some frameworks and some real world tools, we like to call them, around conflict resolution. Tell us a bit about what you're building and how folks can reach you.
That's perfect. Thank you, Laurie. Yeah, so I've just redone my website. So you literally can look at my name, carolinebaird.com. But there's a section for small and medium businesses. Whether you want me to do lunch and learns, workshops, how do I help you make sure that you're from an HR lens compliant, health and safety compliant? Then there's the coaching section, which is I focus more on leadership coaching, and I talk about it being holistic. And the reason I call it holistic leadership coaching is, what is it that's going to help this learning stick? Because we all go to workshops, we all attend events, we maybe follow what we've learned for the next week or a couple of months, and then we go back to our old habits. So I'm really more about how do we break some of those habits, those beliefs, those stories, so that we can actually make what we want to do stick. And then the last piece is the somatic piece, where I do a lot of healing, because I was on a healing journey myself and fell in love with it, and do a lot of the inner work. So in the midst of I've just finished level 1 and level 2 of my somatic practitioner certification, and signing up in the fall for level 3, which then I will be a full-fledged practitioner in the somatic space. But really, how do we start to change the beliefs and what the stories that we tell ourselves, so that we're not always just up here, we actually go in here and we lead from a mind-body kind of connection in everything we do. So I'm working on a couple of low-ticket freebies for individuals, but I'm also on my podcast going to be doing more of a 6-series kind of conversation around the different leadership challenges and styles, and how to walk away with some tips and tools on what to do.
Amazing. And I can't wait to hear it.
Thank you.
And of course, I'm so glad to get the tables turned today and I get to interview you. Thank you so much for being on the Impact List today.
Thank you so much for having me, Laurie. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Impact List. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, subscribe for more grounded, honest discussions with leaders who are figuring it out in real time. And if this episode would help someone you know, pass it along. This is your reminder to lead clearly, stay human, and focus on what actually matters.